He was the cold millionaire, Ethan Cole, a man who moved markets and shaped empires with chilling precision. She was Ava Miller, a ghost from his past he'd unexpectedly pulled from the rainy streets, destitute and desperate, with her 2 small children. Inside the silent luxury of his mansion, he offered her sanctuary, a chance to piece her shattered life back together. Hope began to bloom in the most unlikely soil, until the day Ava unearthed the devastating connection between his calculated success and her devastating ruin. The fragile truce shattered, replaced by the raw agony of betrayal. Ava, all this time, your empire, it was built on the ruins of lives like mine, wasn't it? You call it strategy, Ethan. Ava, that was business, years ago, impersonal. Ava, impersonal? Tell that to my starving children. It wasn't impersonal when your strategy left us homeless. Was helping me just another transaction? The accusation hung heavy in the air, an unbridgeable chasm opening between them. How could he possibly respond? Can a foundation built on such a fractured truth ever hold? His shocking decision to intervene that day on the street, what would it ultimately result in? Destruction or the faintest possibility of redemption? What happens next? Can trust ever be rebuilt from these ashes? Can Ethan find a way to atone, and can Ava find it in her heart to forgive? You absolutely have to see how this story unfolds. If you felt that tension, hit that like button right now. We need to know what you think. Comment below. Could you forgive someone who unknowingly caused your downfall but then saved you? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this incredible journey. The full story is waiting for you. Click here to watch it now and find out what Ethan's shocking decision truly resulted in. Cold millionaire Ethan Cole saw children starving with a woman he knew from long ago. His shocking decision that day resulted in consequences far beyond anything he could ever calculate. The rain fell relentlessly, a grey curtain drawn across the glittering indifference of the city. Inside his custom sedan, insulated from the noise and the wet, Ethan Cole barely registered the deluge. His focus was, as always, on the abstract dance of numbers on the tablet resting on his lap. Market fluctuations, potential acquisitions, the cold, hard logic of profit and loss. The suffering outside his tinted windows was usually just data. Background noise in the symphony of commerce he conducted with ruthless precision. Sentimentality was a flaw in the system, an inefficiency he had long ago purged from his own operational code. The car slowed for a red light, pausing at a busy intersection where the rain seemed to fall even harder. Ethan's gaze drifted, momentarily disengaged from the screen. And then he saw them. Huddled beneath the inadequate awning of a high-end boutique, looking desperately out of place, was a woman and 2 small children. The woman was thin, spectral, her clothes soaked through and clinging to her frame. Her face was mostly hidden by a curtain of tangled wet hair, but her posture radiated a defeat so profound it seemed to absorb the weak streetlight glow. The children, twins he guessed, maybe 4 years old, pressed against her, shivering visibly in their thin, tattered clothes. One was crying, a low, miserable sound that was almost lost in the drumming rain. Ethan's first thought was a flicker of irritation, an untidy element disrupting the cityscape. He'd seen poverty before, plenty of it. It was an unfortunate byproduct, regrettable but distant. His driver knew the routine, ignore, move on when the light changed. But something made him look closer. The woman shifted, murmuring to the crying child, reaching out a hand to brush wet strands of hair from the small face. The gesture, fragile yet fiercely protective, caught the light, and in that instant, the obscured face turned just enough. Recognition struck Ethan like a physical jolt, sharp and unwelcome. Beneath the grime and the exhaustion, despite the years and the hardship that had clearly ravaged her, the underlying structure was undeniable. It couldn't be. The statistical probability was negligible. Yet the certainty hit him with absolute force. Ava Miller. The name echoed from a past he rarely dredged up. High school, a time when he was just Ethan, the intense, awkward scholarship kid, obsessed with escaping his circumstances, and she was Ava Miller. Bright, popular, confident, gliding through the hallways with an effortless grace that seemed to promise a charmed life. He hadn't really known her. He existed on the periphery of her world, aware of her in the way one is aware of distant stars. Admired from afar, occasionally stung by her casual indifference or the echo of laughter shared with friends at his expense. He remembered the sting of her mimicry once, mocking his overly formal question in class. A trivial wound, long forgotten, yet the memory surfaced now, stark and jarring against the present reality. Ava Miller. Begging, her children, starving beside her in the freezing rain. The cognitive dissonance was profound. How? What catastrophic sequence of events could lead from that Ava Miller to this? The question hammered at the walls of his carefully ordered mind. He felt a strange tightening in his chest, an unfamiliar pang of something. Discomfort? Yes, but something more. He watched as Ava tried to comfort the crying child, her own face etched with a despair that felt ancient. The other twin, Mia, just stared out, her eyes large and vacant, a silent testament to prolonged suffering. It was the children who broke through his defenses. Their silent, shivering misery bypassed his logic centers and struck something more fundamental, something he thought he'd long since buried. An impulse, alien and powerful, rose within him. Intervene. It made no sense. It was inefficient, potentially messy. It deviated from every principle he operated by. He crushed sentiment daily. He built his fortune on calculated detachment. But he couldn't look away. He couldn't simply drive on. Not this time. Not from Ava Miller. Not from those children. "Thompson, pull over," he commanded, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the car. The driver, startled by the deviation from protocol, hesitated for only a fraction of a second before smoothly guiding the sedan to the curb. The car's presence was an immediate disruption, a gleaming anomaly beside the huddled figures. Ethan lowered his window part way. The cold, damp air hit his face. "Ava?" His voice was quieter now, testing the name, testing the reality. She flinched as if burned, her head snapping up. Her eyes met his. Recognition dawned instantly, followed by a wave of sheer horror and crippling shame that made her physically recoil. "Ethan! Cole?" It was barely a breath. Lost almost immediately to the wind, she quickly looked down, pulling the children tighter, trying to become invisible. "What happened to you?" The blunt question escaped him again, driven by the sheer impossibility of the scene. "It doesn't matter," she choked out, refusing to look up. "Please, Ethan, just go away. Leave us alone." Her voice was thick with humiliation, desperate for him to simply disappear and pretend this encounter never happened. But Ethan Cole was not a man who walked away easily, not from a business challenge, and apparently not from this. Her plea only solidified his unexpected resolve. This ragged, desperate version of Ava, shielding her starving children, had triggered something within him. A protective instinct, a bizarre sense of responsibility, or merely the ingrained need to impose order on chaos. He wasn't sure, he only knew he couldn't leave them there. "You're not fine," he stated, his voice regaining its familiar command, though perhaps a shade less cold than usual. "And I'm not leaving you here. You and the children are coming with me." "No!" Panic flared in Ava's eyes. She scrambled slightly, trying to gather the girls. "We can't. I won't impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting help." Ethan cut her off, his tone absolute. This was the decision, shocking even to himself, in its deviation from his norm, now being enforced. "I won't have an argument about this, Ava. Not out here. Get in the car." Ava stared at him, trapped. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, to run, but one look at Chloe's tear-streaked face and Mia's shivering form broke her resistance. There was nowhere to run. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, defeated. Ethan immediately signaled Thompson, who emerged with an umbrella, opening the rear door. The warm light from the interior spilled onto the wet sidewalk. "Assist them," Ethan ordered curtly, remaining in his seat, observing the transaction with a detached intensity. Thompson helped Ava guide the lethargic children into the car. Ava herself climbed in hesitantly, moving like someone in a trance, avoiding Ethan's eye. The door closed, muffling the sound of the rain, encasing them in the car's unnatural quiet and the scent of expensive leather. now overlaid with the damp smell of poverty. Ava stared out the window, her reflection a ghostly image against the rain-streaked glass. The children, overwhelmed by the sudden warmth and stillness, huddled against her, quickly succumbing to exhaustion. Ethan said nothing, his mind grappling with the impulsive turn of events, the sheer illogicality of bringing this woman and her troubles directly into his ordered life. The drive to his estate felt suspended in time. When they finally swept through the imposing gates and the mansion came into view, illuminated against the dark, rainy landscape, Ava audibly gasped. It wasn't a sound of admiration, but of intimidation, of being utterly overwhelmed. The car stopped under the portico. Mrs. Evans stood waiting, alerted by Thompson, her face professionally impassive, though her sharp eyes took in every detail of Ava's drenched state and the sleeping children. Ethan got out and took Mia, who was limp with sleep, from Thompson. Ava helped Chloe stumble out, the little girl blinking sleepily at the bright lights of the foyer. "Mrs. Evans, the West Wing guest suite," Ethan instructed, striding inside without looking back. "Food, warm milk, whatever they need." "Immediately, Mr. Cole." He carried Mia into the echoing marble hall, acutely aware of Ava trailing behind him, pulling Chloe close, looking utterly lost and terrified. The heavy front door closed behind them, with a soft, definitive click, sealing the three of them off from the storm outside. But as the warmth of the mansion enveloped them, a chilling question lingered. Was this salvation, or merely a different kind of cage, gilded and silent, awaiting them inside? The mansion door closed on the storm. Inside, Ava faced a terrifying new reality. Was this rescue by Ethan Cole, or elegant captivity? The sheer scale of Ethan Cole's home was overwhelming, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. The foyer Ava had glimpsed bled into vast living spaces, decorated with an unnerving, minimalist precision. Everything spoke of immense wealth, curated taste, and a distinct lack of lived-in warmth. Following Mrs. Evans silently up a sweeping staircase and along a hushed, carpeted corridor, Ava felt like an intruder, a dirty smudge on a pristine canvas. Chloe and Mia clung to her hands, their small faces pale, eyes wide as they took in the alien surroundings. The guest suite assigned to them wasn't just a room, it was a self-contained world of quiet luxury. Soft light emanated from unseen sources, gleaming on polished wood floors, partially covered by thick cream-colored rugs. The main bedroom housed a bed so large it seemed decadent, piled high with pillows and covered in a duvet that looked like spun silk. Abstract paintings, cool and remote, adorned the walls. An adjoining room, clearly prepared for the children, held two smaller beds, looking equally soft and inviting. Even the air smelled different here, clean, faintly floral, utterly unlike the damp, grimy air of the streets they had just escaped. While Mrs. Evans moved with unobtrusive efficiency, laying out soft pajamas and directing Ava toward a bathroom that rivaled any spa Ava had ever imagined, Chloe and Mia began to tentatively explore. They touched the smooth, cool surface of a lacquered dresser, ran hesitant fingers over the velvet armchair, their initial fear momentarily eclipsed by childlike wonder. Yet the shadow of their recent past lingered. They moved quietly, almost stealthily, their laughter, when it briefly escaped, quickly stifled. They constantly sought Ava's gaze, needing the anchor of her presence in this bewilderingly grand space. Ava felt the oppressive weight of perfection. Every object was artfully placed, every surface gleamed. It magnified her own sense of unworthiness, her tattered clothes, soon discarded for a borrowed robe that felt sinfully soft against her skin. Her tangled hair, the deep exhaustion etched onto her face. Shame was a physical entity, a hot flush crawling up her neck, a tightness in her chest. To be seen like this, stripped bare of dignity, by Ethan Cole, the memory of his cool, appraising gaze from the car made her insides clench. What must he think? Did he see only the failure, the poor choices, the desperate woman she had become? The shower was a small miracle. Hot water sluiced away the grime and the bone-deep chill, but it couldn't wash away the humiliation or the gnawing anxiety. Wrapped in a thick, oversized robe, she found Mrs. Evans had delivered a tray, steaming soup, fresh bread, butter, milk for the girls. The aroma was dizzying. Chloe and Mia, now in soft pajamas, drank their milk with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes of their recent hunger. "Mr. Cole has requested to speak with you briefly, madam, once you feel settled," Mrs. Evans informed her, her voice a neutral murmur, her eyes missing nothing. "Please use the intercom should you require anything at all." She then vanished as silently as she had appeared. Ava forced herself to eat, the rich vegetable soup warming her from the inside out. Though each spoonful felt heavy with the unspoken cost of this charity. She watched the girls eat, their initial eagerness quickly giving way to overwhelming fatigue. The sudden shift from constant, gnawing stress to warmth, safety, and satiety was jarring. Soon, both were asleep in the small beds, their breathing soft and even, faces smooth with a peace Ava hadn't seen in months, perhaps years. Looking at them, Ava felt a familiar surge of fierce love, quickly followed by the bitter tang of failure. She had done this to them. Her choices, her inability to overcome the odds after Ryan's betrayal, had led them to that rain-soaked corner. And now their fate rested in the hands of a man she barely knew, a man whose motives remained terrifyingly unclear. A soft knock sounded, pulling her from her thoughts. Ethan, her stomach plummeted. Steeling herself, smoothing the unfamiliar robe, she opened the door. He stood there, having changed into dark trousers and a simple dark grey sweater that did nothing to diminish the aura of quiet power surrounding him. His sharp eyes scanned her face, then glanced past her towards the children's room. "May I?" He gestured towards the suite sitting area, where a low fire now burned in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ava nodded, stepping back. She perched on the very edge of a plush armchair, feeling exposed and defensive. Ethan took the facing chair, the firelight highlighting the sharp planes of his face. The silence stretched, amplifying the crackle of the flames. "The children are asleep?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes. Thank you again for everything." The words felt inadequate, hollow. "You look better," he observed, a statement of fact rather than a compliment. "Warmer." Ava just nodded, unable to meet his gaze for more than a fleeting second. "Ava," he began again, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more focused, the casual pleasantries evaporating. "I need to understand what led you to that street corner tonight." It wasn't a request. It was the demand of a man accustomed to having information laid bare. She flinched inwardly. The shame was a physical weight. "Ethan, it's not something I like to talk about." "Perhaps not," he conceded, his gaze unwavering. "But you are under my roof now, with your children. Indulge me." There was no escaping it. Taking a deep, trembling breath, Ava began, her voice barely above a whisper, starting with the blinding intoxication of young love with Ryan Peterson. She spoke of the shared dreams that quickly soured, the shock of the pregnancy, the casual, brutal finality of his abandonment. "He said he wasn't ready," she recounted, the words tasting like ash. "He just left, changed his number, vanished, as if we, the girls and I, never existed." She described the initial struggle, the help from disappointed parents that eventually dried up, the relentless grind of working low-wage jobs while juggling childcare for twins. "I found a decent job eventually," she said, her voice strengthening slightly with the memory of that brief period of stability. "Office administration. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. We had a small apartment. It was ours. For a while I thought we'd make it." Then her voice faltered again. "The company folded. Restructuring, they called it. Mergers. Decisions made in boardrooms far away." She kept her gaze fixed on the fire, deliberately vague, the specific details lost in the fog of subsequent trauma. "My department was eliminated, just like that. No notice, just gone." She recounted the desperate job search, the dwindling savings, the soul-crushing rejections, the impossible math of earning enough to cover rent, and the exorbitant cost of childcare for two. The eviction notice. "It felt like the end of the world," she whispered. "After that, shelters, friends' couches for a night or two, until we wore out our welcome. Then, just the street." She trailed off, the full weight of her despair hanging in the air. When she finally risked a glance at Ethan, her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. but also a glint of defiance born of pure survival. "So now you know," she finished quietly. Ethan listened without interruption, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. Inside, however, a complex mixture of emotions churned. He felt a cold anger towards the faceless Ryan Peterson, a contempt for the man's cowardice. He felt a genuine pang of sympathy for Ava's relentless struggle, her fierce maternal determination against impossible odds. Her resilience was impressive, in a detached, analytical way. But intertwined with that was something else, something uncomfortable. Her mention of the company folding, decisions made in boardrooms far away. It resonated with a vague unease. His own world operated on such decisions. He'd overseen mergers, restructurings, downsizings. Necessary efficiencies, he always told himself. Collateral damage in the pursuit of growth and profit. Had one of his decisions, years ago, indirectly set this catastrophic chain of events in motion for Ava? The thought was a fleeting, unwelcome flicker, quickly extinguished. Coincidence? The world was full of them. Still, her raw vulnerability, stripped bare before him, pierced his usual armor. He wasn't accustomed to feeling responsible, even indirectly. He preferred control, clear cause and effect. This was messy. "You should have reached out," he said, the words emerging harsher than intended. "To someone. Anyone." Ava laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humor. "Reached out? To who, Ethan? The friends who pitied me but couldn't really help? The family ashamed of my situation? Or perhaps the successful acquaintances from a past life, like you, who would only see how far I'd fallen?" Her voice trembled with renewed shame and a spark of anger. "Pride is a luxury, I know. But sometimes it's all you have left." Her words hit their mark. He understood pride. He understood the aversion to showing weakness. He fell silent again, contemplating. His initial impulse had been disruption, a need to fix the discordant image she presented. Now, faced with the bleak reality of her story, the path forward seemed less clear. Offering money felt crass. Simply sending her on her way tomorrow felt wrong, somehow incomplete, now that he knew. He leaned back, adopting a more deliberate tone. "What happened in the past, the reasons, they matter, but they don't change the present. You and your daughters need stability. Immediately." He wasn't offering pity, he was stating a logistical necessity. "You will stay here, for now, as my guest." Ava stiffened. "Stay here? Ethan, I can't possibly—" "You can and you will," he cut her off, the familiar decisiveness returning, a shield against the uncomfortable emotions her story had stirred. "Consider it temporary housing, until you get back on your feet. We can discuss practicalities tomorrow, finding childcare, exploring job options, perhaps further education." He was already formulating a plan, imposing order on the chaos. It was how he functioned. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the desperate need warring with deep-seated mistrust and pride. He stood up, implicitly ending the discussion. "Mrs. Evans will ensure you have everything you need. Rest, Ava. That's the priority now." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. He didn't look back at her, but addressed the room. Whatever happened before, whatever mistakes were made, the children don't deserve to suffer for them. It was the closest he could come to expressing the core reason for his uncharacteristic intervention. He closed the door gently behind him, leaving Ava alone once more in the vast, silent suite. The fire crackled, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. Ethan Cole's offer was concrete, practical, a potential lifeline. But his reasons remained shrouded, his demeanor a confusing mix of command and something that might almost have been concern. Ava felt a tremor of fear run through her. Accepting his help meant stepping further into his world, a world governed by rules she didn't understand, controlled by a man whose past connection to her was tenuous and whose present motives were a dangerous unknown. Warmth and safety were temporary comforts. Now, under Ethan Cole's calculating eyes, could Ava truly rebuild her life, or was she caught in his web? Ava stared at him, stunned. Education? It felt like a distant dream, something belonging to another life. "Ethan, I couldn't possibly accept that. It's too much. You've already done so much." "Consider it an investment," he countered smoothly. perhaps deflecting the emotional weight of the offer. In your potential, a skilled employee, a self-sufficient individual, is ultimately an asset. Or, he added, a fraction softer, consider it simply the right thing to do to ensure your daughters have the future they deserve through their mother's capabilities. Ava's mind reeled. The offer was staggering. A pathway back to a life she thought was lost forever. The chance to learn again, to build skills, to potentially secure a real career. It was intoxicating. But the source of the offer, Ethan Cole, the man whose motives she still couldn't decipher, the man to whom she would become even more indebted, filled her with profound apprehension. Was this genuine support, or another form of control, a way to shape her future according to his design? Would she ever truly be free if she accepted this? She thought of Chloe and Mia, sleeping peacefully upstairs, oblivious to the complex currents swirling around their mother. Their faces, finally free from the constant shadow of hunger and fear, solidified her resolve. Her pride was a small price to pay for their future. If you're sure, she began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how I could ever repay. Repayment isn't the objective, Ethan interrupted, though his eyes held that familiar analytical glint. Success is. Your success. Focus on that. He straightened up. I'll have my assistant compile a list of suitable online programs and necessary equipment by tomorrow. We'll review them together. Just like that, it was decided. A business transaction. In the weeks that followed, Ava threw herself into her studies with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. Ethan provided a laptop, high-speed internet access, and a quiet corner in the library designated as her study space. At first, navigating online portals, absorbing academic jargon, and managing deadlines felt overwhelming after years away from any formal learning structure. There were moments of intense frustration, nights when she stared blankly at the screen, convinced she couldn't do it. Ethan, true to his word, remained largely detached, but strategically supportive. He didn't hover, but he inquired about her progress with the air of a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. Occasionally, if she struggled with a concept related to business principles, he would offer a surprisingly insightful, if clinically delivered, explanation. He arranged for Mrs. Evans to watch the children during Ava's dedicated study hours, removing that logistical barrier. Yet his support wasn't always comfortable. Sometimes his feedback on an assignment she hesitantly showed him was brutally direct, focusing solely on flaws without acknowledging effort. Adequate but lacking strategic depth, he might comment. Or your analysis needs to be more data-driven, less anecdotal. It felt less like mentorship and more like performance evaluation, reminding her constantly of the power dynamic between them. He also occasionally made assumptions about her schedule, assigning her small research tasks related to his own work, framing them as practical application exercises for her studies, blurring the lines between guest, student, and potential employee. Ava learned to navigate these interactions carefully, accepting the help while quietly resisting the subtle encroachments on her autonomy. She focused on her coursework, finding a forgotten part of herself awakening. The sharp, capable mind that hardship had forced into dormancy. Small victories, understanding a complex financial model, acing an online quiz, writing a well-reasoned analysis, became vital fuel. She was reclaiming pieces of herself, slowly, painstakingly. The children flourished in the stable environment, their laughter becoming a more constant presence. Ethan, observing them, sometimes allowed a rare, unguarded smile to touch his lips, particularly when Mia, the quieter twin, would shyly present him with a crayon drawing, or Chloe would chatter excitedly about a bird she saw in the garden. These small moments chipped away at his reserve, humanizing him in Ava's eyes, making the dynamic between them even more confusing. He was her benefactor, her landlord, her sometimes harsh critic, the ghost from her past, and increasingly a surprisingly gentle presence in her children's lives. The lines were blurring dangerously. Ava tasted independence again, fragile but real. Yet every success drew her deeper into Ethan Cole's orbit, where gratitude and obligation were becoming dangerously entwined. What would happen when the lines blurred completely? Ava stared at him, stunned. Education? It felt like a distant dream, something belonging to another life. Ethan, I couldn't possibly accept that. It's too much. You've already done so much. Consider it an investment, he countered smoothly, perhaps deflecting the emotional weight of the offer. In your potential, a skilled employee, a self-sufficient individual, is ultimately an asset. Or, he added, a fraction softer, consider it simply the right thing to do to ensure your daughters have the future they deserve through their mother's capabilities. Ava's mind reeled. The offer was staggering, a pathway back to a life she thought was lost forever. The chance to learn again, to build skills, to potentially secure a real career. It was intoxicating. But the source of the offer, Ethan Cole, the man whose motives she still couldn't decipher, the man to whom she would become even more indebted, filled her with profound apprehension. Was this genuine support or another form of control, a way to shape her future according to his design? Would she ever truly be free if she accepted this? She thought of Chloe and Mia sleeping peacefully upstairs, oblivious to the complex currents swirling around their mother. Their faces, finally free from the constant shadow of hunger and fear, solidified her resolve. Her pride was a small price to pay for their future. If you're sure, she began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how I could ever repay. Repayment isn't the objective, Ethan interrupted, though his eyes held that familiar analytical glint. Success is. Your success, focus on that. He straightened up. I'll have my assistant compile a list of suitable online programs and necessary equipment by tomorrow. We'll review them together. Just like that, it was decided. A business transaction. In the weeks that followed, Ava threw herself into her studies with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. Ethan provided a laptop, high-speed internet access, and a quiet corner in the library designated as her study space. At first, navigating online portals, absorbing academic jargon, and managing deadlines felt overwhelming after years away from any formal learning structure. There were moments of intense frustration, nights when she stared blankly at the screen, convinced she couldn't do it. Ethan, true to his word, remained largely detached but strategically supportive. He didn't hover, but he inquired about her progress with the air of a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. Occasionally, if she struggled with a concept related to business principles, he would offer a surprisingly insightful, if clinically delivered, explanation. He arranged for Mrs. Evans to watch the children during Ava's dedicated study hours, removing that logistical barrier. Yet his support wasn't always comfortable. Sometimes his feedback on an assignment she hesitantly showed him was brutally direct, focusing solely on flaws without acknowledging effort. Adequate, but lacking strategic depth, he might comment, or your analysis needs to be more data-driven, less anecdotal. It felt less like mentorship and more like performance evaluation, reminding her constantly of the power dynamic between them. He also occasionally made assumptions about her schedule, assigning her small research tasks related to his own work, framing them as practical application exercises for her studies, blurring the lines between guest, student, and potential employee. Ava learned to navigate these interactions carefully, accepting the help while quietly resisting the subtle encroachments on her autonomy. She focused on her coursework, finding a forgotten part of herself awakening. The sharp, capable mind that hardship had forced into dormancy. Small victories, understanding a complex financial model, acing an online quiz, writing a well-reasoned analysis became vital fuel. She was reclaiming pieces of herself, slowly, painstakingly. The children flourished in the stable environment, their laughter becoming a more constant presence. Ethan, observing them, sometimes allowed a rare, unguarded smile to touch his lips, particularly when Mia, the quieter twin, would shyly present him with a crayon drawing, or Chloe would chatter excitedly about a bird she saw in the garden. These small moments chipped away at his reserve, humanizing him in Ava's eyes, making the dynamic between them even more confusing. He was her benefactor, her landlord, her sometimes harsh critic, the ghost from her past, and increasingly a surprisingly gentle presence in her children's lives. The lines were blurring dangerously. Ava tasted independence again, fragile but real. Yet every success drew her deeper into Ethan Cole's orbit, where gratitude and obligation were becoming dangerously entwined. What would happen when the lines blurred completely? Ava tasted independence again, fragile but real. Yet, every success drew her deeper into Ethan Cole's orbit, where gratitude and obligation were becoming dangerously entwined. What would happen when the lines blurred completely? Months settled into a rhythm within the grand, quiet house. Ava's online business administration courses progressed steadily. The initial overwhelming feeling gave way to a rediscovery of her own sharp intellect. She found satisfaction in mastering complex subjects, in the small victories of submitting well-argued papers and passing challenging modules. The fog of exhaustion and despair that had clouded her for so long began to lift, revealing glimpses of the capable, confident woman she used to be. Her appearance reflected this internal shift. The haunted look in her eyes softened, replaced by focus, and the simple, clean clothes provided by Mrs. Evans now seemed to fit her better, worn with a returning sense of self-worth rather than borrowed shame. Ethan observed her transformation with a keen, almost proprietary interest. He'd provided the resources, the environment, and now he saw the results. He had assigned her increasingly complex research tasks, ostensibly related to her coursework, but often conveniently aligned with peripheral aspects of his own business interests. Market analyses of defunct competitors, historical data on industry shifts. He framed it as real-world application, and Ava, eager to prove her worth and accelerate her learning, tackled them diligently. Her insights were often sharp, her research meticulous. On more than one occasion, her summaries provided a perspective Ethan's own highly paid analysts had missed. Your synthesis of the logistical failures in the Argent core collapse was unexpectedly thorough, he commented one evening, reviewing a report she had submitted. It was high praise, delivered in his typically understated, almost grudging manner. A small thrill went through Ava. "Thank you, Ethan. I found the historical supply chain data quite revealing." Their interactions, while still retaining a formal edge dictated by their circumstances, became less strained. Sometimes, working late in the library, Ava on her coursework, Ethan on his global dealings, a comfortable silence would settle between them, broken only by the soft click of keyboards. Occasionally, a brief non-personal conversation might spark, a shared observation about a news headline, a comment on the changing seasons visible through the tall library windows. He was also undeniably good with the children. Chloe and Mia now greeted him with genuine, uncomplicated affection. He never seemed awkward or impatient with their childish chatter or demands for attention. Ava often found him on the floor with them, letting them clamber over him while he read them a story, or patiently answering their endless questions about the squirrels in the garden. Seeing this gentler, unguarded side of him chipped away further at Ava's reserve, creating a confusing dissonance with the image of the cold, calculating billionaire. Gratitude warred with caution, and a fragile tendril of something warmer, something dangerously close to affection, began to take root in her heart. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when he was home, to the quiet hum of shared space, even if unspoken tensions remained. It was one such evening, while working on a research task Ethan had assigned, compiling a historical overview of aggressive acquisitions in the tech manufacturing sector over the past decade, that the fragile piece shattered. Ethan was away on a short business trip, leaving Ava with uninterrupted access to the specific archived digital files he'd unlocked for her project. She was deep in concentration, cross-referencing timelines and company names, tracing the ripple effects of major corporate takeovers. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, compiling data points, analyzing press releases from the era. Then a name flashed across the screen, embedded within a series of internal memos discussing a particularly ruthless hostile takeover executed by Cole Industries 7 years prior. Innovatech Solutions. Ava froze, her breath hitched. Innovatech, her old company, the place where she'd finally felt secure, where she'd been building a career, where she'd worked until the day the doors were abruptly shuttered. Her heart began to pound, a sickening drumbeat against her ribs. It had to be a coincidence. Innovatech wasn't a unique name, but the time frame. 7 years ago, it matched perfectly. With trembling fingers, she clicked deeper into the archived files Ethan had provided. Memos, financial projections, internal strategy documents outlining the takeover plan for Innovatech Solutions. The language was cold, clinical, detached, discussing asset stripping, redundancy calculations, synergistic eliminations. It detailed the swift, brutal efficiency with which coal industries had acquired and subsequently dismantled Innovatech, absorbing its valuable patents and discarding the rest, including most of its workforce. Her department, her job. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The sudden closure, the vague explanations about restructuring, the abrupt end to the stability she had fought so hard to build for her daughters after Ryan's desertion. It wasn't just bad luck or market forces, it was a direct consequence of a strategic decision made, approved, likely driven by the very man whose roof she now lived under, whose charity she depended upon, the man she was starting to care for. Nausea rose in her throat. The screen blurred through a sudden film of tears. She felt cold, colder than she had felt even on that rain-soaked street corner. This wasn't just irony, it felt like a cruel cosmic joke. The man who had inadvertently pushed her towards the abyss was the same one who had pulled her back from the edge. His act of shocking kindness now seemed like a grotesque mockery. Had he known? All this time, had he known the connection when he saw her name, heard her story? Or was his ignorance somehow worse, proof of the careless destruction wrought by men like him, who moved markets and shattered lives without a second thought for the human cost? She didn't know which possibility was more devastating. She sat there for a long time, staring blankly at the screen, the cold, hard facts of Ethan Cole's business dealings laid bare. The warmth of the library felt suffocating. The silence of the mansion pressed in on her. The foundation of the fragile new life she had been building crumbled beneath her feet. Ethan returned late the following evening. Ava heard the sound of his car, the distant greeting to Mrs. Evans. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had spent the day in a daze, mechanically going through the motions with the children, her mind numb with shock and a rising tide of icy anger. She needed to confront him. She needed the truth, however ugly. She waited until the children were asleep, then walked downstairs. She found him in his study, pouring himself a drink, the picture of relaxed power after a successful trip. Ethan, her voice was low, tight, barely controlled. He turned, a slight smile on his face that vanished instantly when he saw her expression. "Ava, is everything all right? You look pale." "I was working on the research you assigned," she said, keeping her voice steady with immense effort. "The acquisitions overview." "Ah, yes. Find anything interesting?" he asked, taking a sip of his amber liquid, still seemingly oblivious. "Innovatech Solutions," she stated, the name hanging in the air between them like an accusation. Ethan froze, his glass halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowed slightly. Innovatech? Yes, that was one of coal industry's early strategic acquisitions. Quite successful, ultimately. Why? The casual, dismissive tone, the framing of it as a success. It broke something inside Ava. "Successful," she repeated, her voice trembling now with suppressed fury. "Successful for you, maybe. Do you have any idea what that strategic acquisition cost people, Ethan? Real people?" He frowned, lowering his glass, sensing the shift, the sudden, dangerous undercurrent. "It was a business decision, Ava, necessary for growth. Some redundancies are unfortunately inevitable in such situations." He fell back on the familiar, detached language of the boardroom. "Redundancies?" Ava laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Is that what you call destroying livelihoods? I worked at Innovatech, Ethan. I had built a life there. A fragile one, yes, after Ryan left. But it was mine. I was good at my job. Then, one day, because of your necessary decision, it was all gone. My job, my security, everything. That was the start, Ethan. The start of losing the apartment, the start of the shelters, the start of that street corner where you found me." The accusation struck him with the force he hadn't anticipated. He stared at her, the pieces clicking into place in his own mind with a sickening lurch. Innovatech, her job loss, the timeline. He hadn't made the connection. He'd never even considered the low-level employees of companies acquired years ago. They were numbers on a spreadsheet, factored into the cost of acquisition. To realize that one of those numbers was Ava, the woman now standing before him, her eyes blazing with hurt and betrayal. "Ava, I didn't know," he stammered. the confident facade crumbling, replaced by genuine shock and a dawning horror. I swear I never connected. Didn't know, Ava cried, tears finally spilling, hot and angry. Or didn't care. Does it even matter? Your success was built on the ruins of lives like mine. And then you swoop in like some kind of savior, offering charity, making me dependent on you all over again. Was this all some twisted game to you? No, of course not. Ethan stepped towards her, his hands raised instinctively, defensively. Ava, listen to me. The acquisition, it was years ago. Business was different then. I was different. It was purely strategic, impersonal. Impersonal, she spat back, recoiling from his approach. It wasn't impersonal for me, Ethan. It wasn't impersonal for my children when we had nowhere to sleep. You built your empire on decisions like that, never looking back, never caring about the redundancies. And now you expect me to just, what, be grateful? Accept your help knowing it came from the same source that caused my ruin. The raw pain in her voice, the irrefutable truth of her accusation hit him harder than any market downturn ever had. He saw it then, the direct line from his past ambition, his cold calculation, to the suffering reflected in her eyes. The realization was devastating, stripping away his justifications, leaving only the ugly reality of consequence. He had broken her life long before he'd ever offered to fix it. He stood silent, stripped of his usual defenses, the weight of his past actions crashing down on him. The gulf that had always existed between them, bridged temporarily by circumstance and nascent feelings, now yawned open again, wider and deeper than ever before, seemingly impassable. The truth lay shattered between them, sharp and irreparable. He saw the abyss his past had created. She saw only betrayal. Could any bridge span such a chasm of hurt and broken trust? The truth lay shattered between them, sharp and irreparable. He saw the abyss his past had created. She saw only betrayal. Could any bridge span such a chasm of hurt and broken trust? Silence descended upon the opulent mansion, heavier and more suffocating than any physical weight. The aftermath of Ava's confrontation left a void, charged with unspoken accusations and the raw residue of pain. Ava retreated into herself, erecting walls far higher and colder than any she'd possessed even on the streets. She moved through the guest suite like a phantom, her interactions with Mrs. Evans reduced to curt necessities, her time with Chloe and Mia marked by a forced brightness that barely concealed the turmoil churning beneath. The luxury that had once felt intimidating now felt tainted, mocking. Every comfort was a reminder of the source of her past ruin. She seriously contemplated leaving, gathering her children and walking back out into the uncertain world, preferring its honest hardship to this gilded cage built by the architect of her downfall. Only the thought of Chloe and Mia's fragile stability, the warmth they'd finally found, kept her rooted, trapped in limbo. Ethan, too, seemed adrift in the wreckage. The initial shock and defensive explanations had given way to a crushing weight of guilt unlike anything he had ever experienced. His carefully constructed world, built on logic, control, and the clean lines of profit and loss, offered no framework for this kind of personal devastation, this irrefutable evidence of the human cost of his ambition. He found himself replaying Ava's words, seeing the haunted look in her eyes, juxtaposing it with the cold, impersonal language of the Innovatech acquisition files he pulled from his archives late one night. He spread the old documents across his vast, polished desk. 7 years ago, Innovatech Solutions. He scanned the reports, market share projections, synergy analyses, redundancy estimates listed as cold percentages. He forced himself to look deeper this time, beyond the executive summaries. He found departmental breakdowns, employee count reductions listed by division. Administration, her likely division. Numbers on a page then, representing necessary cuts for shareholder value. Now they represented Ava, shivering in the rain. They represented Chloe and Mia, crying from hunger. The disconnect was sickening. He, Ethan Cole, who prided himself on foresight and control, had been utterly blind to the real-world consequences bleeding out from his calculated decisions. The ruthlessness he had cultivated as a tool for success now felt like a stain on his soul. He barely slept. During the day, he went through the motions of managing his empire, but his focus was fractured. His usual sharp decisiveness felt blunted by a persistent, gnawing self-recrimination. He saw Ava occasionally, a fleeting glimpse in a corridor, her averted gaze as she hurried past, her stiff posture if they accidentally found themselves in the same room. The vibrant, resilient woman who had begun to emerge, the one whose intelligence had impressed him and whose quiet strength had unexpectedly captivated him, was gone, replaced by a figure radiating hurt and mistrust. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him more than any market threat that he was solely responsible. He understood instinctively that apologies, however sincere, were insufficient. Words were cheap, easily deployed, and just as easily disbelieved, especially by someone whose trust had been so profoundly broken. First by Ryan Peterson, now by him. If there was any path forward, any infinitesimal chance of bridging the chasm he had created, it would have to be paved with actions, not words. He started quietly, tentatively. First, he instructed Mrs. Evans to ensure Ava and the children lacked for absolutely nothing, but to give Ava complete space, not to press her or report back on her mood unless there was genuine cause for concern about her well-being. He respected the wall she had erected, even as it pained him. Then, driven by a compulsion he didn't fully understand, he began to dig deeper into the Innovatech closure. He tasked a discreet external research firm, not his internal team, to trace the impact beyond the initial redundancy figures. What had happened to the other employees? Were their hardship funds established at the time? Unlikely, given his mindset back then. He spent hours scrolling through obscure online forums, searching for mentions, trying to piece together the scattered fragments of lives affected by that single profitable decision. It was a grim, humbling exercise. He also began reviewing current coal industry's policies. Were their severance packages adequate? Were their restructuring processes sufficiently humane? He found himself questioning assumptions he'd held for years, arguing with his own executives about implementing more robust employee support systems, much to their surprise. He wasn't just trying to fix the past was forcing him to re-evaluate his present and future. Ava noticed the subtle shifts, though she tried not to. Ethan seemed quieter, less imposing. There was a weariness about him, a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He no longer made assumptions about her schedule or assigned her research tasks. When their paths inevitably crossed, he would simply nod, his gaze holding a mixture of guilt and hesitant respect, before quickly looking away, granting her the distance she clearly craved. He continued to interact gently with Chloe and Mia. He never used them as intermediaries, never asked them about their mother. But sometimes Ava would overhear him reading to them in the playroom. His voice softer than she'd ever heard it, or she'd see him patiently helping Mia tie her shoes. It was confusing. This quiet consideration, this respect for her pain, felt genuine. It didn't excuse his past actions, but it complicated her anger, making it harder to maintain the pure, cold fury she felt she should hold on to. One afternoon, driven by a need for air, for a space outside the suffocating luxury of the mansion, Ava took the girls for a walk in the extensive gardens. Ethan was nowhere in sight. As they rounded a bend near a less frequented part of the grounds, Ava saw him standing by a small ornamental pond, talking on his phone. His back was to them, his voice carried faintly on the breeze, low but intense. No, severance isn't enough in this case. There were dependents. Commitments made based on projected stability. Find out if a trust can be established. Anonymously. Yes, completely anonymous. Focus on educational opportunities for the affected children. I don't care about the precedent, just make it happen. He disconnected the call, standing silently for a moment, staring into the water, his shoulders slumped with a weight Ava hadn't seen before. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration or exhaustion, before turning and walking slowly back towards the house, never noticing them among the trees. Ava stood frozen, her heart pounding. An anonymous trust, educational opportunities, affected children. It couldn't be about her situation specifically, could it? He had said children, plural. Was he trying to quietly undo some of the damage caused by Innovatech or other similar past actions? The thought that he might be actively, tangibly trying to atone, not just for her, but for others, without seeking recognition or using it to gain her forgiveness. It sent a tremor through her carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. The betrayal still felt too raw, the chasm too wide. But for the first time since the revelation, a tiny crack appeared in the ice around her heart. She saw not just the cold millionaire who had contributed to her ruin, nor just the benefactor who had offered her shelter, but a man grappling with his own past, flawed and complex, and perhaps, just perhaps, genuinely trying to change. Later that evening, as Ethan sat alone in his study, staring not at financial reports but at the bleak findings of the research firm regarding former Innovatech employees, there was a soft knock. It was Ava. She stood in the doorway, hesitant but resolute. "Ethan," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "We need to talk, not about forgiveness, not yet, but about practicalities, about the future for Chloe and Mia." Ethan looked up, surprise and a fragile flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't absolution, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was dialogue. It was the first tentative step onto a bridge that just days ago had seemed utterly consumed by the abyss. He offered a hand, not across a boardroom table, but across the chasm of his own making. Would Ava dare to take that first, terrifying step toward forgiveness and rebuilding? He offered a hand, not across a boardroom table, but across the chasm of his own making. Would Ava dare to take that first, terrifying step toward forgiveness and rebuilding? The conversation that night in Ethan's study wasn't a magical fix. Trust, once shattered so profoundly, couldn't be instantly repaired. But it was a beginning. Ava had opened a door, not to immediate forgiveness, but to dialogue, to the possibility of navigating the practicalities of their intertwined lives. It was the first fragile thread cast across the abyss. In the weeks and months that followed, they walked a careful path. Ava continued her studies with renewed focus, finding solace and strength in reclaiming her intellectual capabilities. Ethan gave her space, but remained a consistent, albeit altered, presence. He no longer offered unsolicited advice couched as commands. Instead, he listened. When Ava tentatively shared a challenge she faced in her coursework, he offered suggestions framed as possibilities, not directives. He celebrated her small successes with quiet, genuine pride that felt different from his earlier, more analytical assessments. He continued his own quiet atonement. Ava learned indirectly, through a stray comment from Mrs. Evans or a news clipping about anonymous corporate philanthropy, about the educational trust fund benefiting children affected by closures like Innovatech's. She saw changes in the way Ethan spoke about his business, less focus on pure profit, more discussion of sustainable practices and employee welfare, sometimes met with resistance from his board, which he now navigated with a different kind of determination. He was still a formidable businessman, but the cold ruthlessness seemed tempered by a newfound conscience. Slowly, cautiously, Ava began to lower her guard. She saw the consistency in his actions, the deep, unwavering respect he showed her, the genuine remorse that still shadowed his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She started joining him for occasional quiet dinners after the children were asleep, the conversation moving tentatively beyond logistics into shared thoughts, cautious hopes, and acknowledged fears. They spoke of the children, of Ava's studies, sometimes even touched upon Ethan's work, with Ava occasionally offering an insightful perspective that he now welcomed openly. One afternoon, feeling a surge of strength she hadn't possessed months earlier, Ava made a phone call. Ryan Peterson. She kept it brief, her voice steady and devoid of accusation. She informed him she was rebuilding her life, that her daughters were safe, loved and provided for, and that she required nothing from him except his permanent absence from their lives. There were no dramatics, just a calm, firm severing of the final tie to that painful past. Hanging up, she felt a sense of release, a final shedding of victimhood. She was no longer defined by his abandonment. She was defining her own future. The shift between Ava and Ethan became palpable. The mansion, once feeling like a gilded cage, started to feel more like a shared space, filled not just with the children's laughter, but with the quiet hum of mutual understanding. Comfortable silences replaced the tense ones. Shared smiles over something Chloe or Mia said became more frequent. One evening, Watching Ethan patiently help Mia build an elaborate block tower, Ava felt the last vestiges of her anger finally dissolve, replaced by a complex, deep-seated affection she could no longer deny. She saw not the man whose past actions had hurt her, but the man who was actively choosing a different path, the man who treated her daughters with unwavering kindness, the man who looked at her with a vulnerability she recognized because it mirrored her own. A few weeks later, on a crisp autumn evening, almost a year after their fateful encounter in the rain, Ethan asked Ava to walk with him in the garden after the children were asleep. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading blooms. They walked in silence for a while, eventually stopping near the small pond where Ava had once overheard his phone call. Ethan turned to her, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet intensity, a nervousness she'd never seen in him before. "Ava," he began, his voice slightly rough, "we've come a long way. Through things I never anticipated, things I deeply regret causing." Ava met his gaze, her heart beating a little faster. "We have, Ethan. I know sorry will never be enough for what my past actions put you through," he continued, his eyes searching hers. "But I hope my actions since then, I hope they've shown you that I am not the same man I was. That you have changed me, you and Chloe and Mia." He took a hesitant step closer. "Living here, with you, with the girls, it's filled a void in my life I didn't even know existed. It's shown me what truly matters, beyond the deals and the bottom line. It's shown me home." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Ava Miller, you are the strongest, most resilient, most incredible woman I have ever known. You rebuilt your life from ashes, not just with my help, but through your own fierce determination. And somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel. Instead, he simply opened it, revealing a simple, elegant diamond ring that sparkled in the moonlight. "This isn't about gratitude or obligation or fixing the past," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "This is about the future, our future. I want to build a life with you, Ava, a real partnership, a family. I want to be a father to Chloe and Mia in every way that matters, if they'll have me. And I want to spend the rest of my days proving I'm worthy of your trust, of your love. Will you marry me, Ava?" Tears welled in Ava's eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming happiness, of disbelief, of a profound sense of peace settling over her. The journey had been impossibly hard, scarred by betrayal and doubt, but standing here now, looking into Ethan's earnest, vulnerable eyes, she knew the answer without hesitation. Trust hadn't just been rebuilt. It had been forged anew, stronger and more precious than before. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Ethan, I will." He let out a shaky breath, relief washing over his face as he carefully slid the ring onto her finger. He then pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if he'd never let go, right there under the vast star-filled sky. Their wedding, held a few months later, was exactly as Ava had wished. Small, intimate, and deeply personal. It took place in the sun-drenched garden of the mansion, attended only by a handful of genuinely close friends Ethan had reconnected with, Mrs. Evans dabbing her eyes discreetly, and the two beaming flower girls, Chloe and Mia, who scattered petals with infectious enthusiasm. Ava wore a simple, elegant ivory dress, her eyes shining with a happiness that radiated from within. Ethan stood waiting for her, his gaze locked on hers, filled with an undisguised adoration that silenced any lingering whispers of his former coldness. Their vows were quiet, heartfelt promises acknowledging their complex past, but focusing firmly on a future built together on love, respect, and unwavering commitment. Married life settled into a rhythm of surprising normalcy and deep contentment. Ava completed her business courses with distinction, eventually taking on a meaningful role managing some of Ethan's philanthropic ventures, finding fulfillment in using her skills for positive impact. Ethan continued to run his empire, but with a noticeably more ethical and human-centric approach, often seeking Ava's perspective not just as his wife, but as a trusted advisor. They were partners in every sense of the word. Chloe and Mia thrived, secure in the unconditional love of both their mother and the man they now unreservedly called Dad. A little over a year after their wedding, Ava shared news that brought a fresh wave of joy to their lives. She was pregnant. Ethan's reaction was one of pure, unadulterated delight. He was endlessly attentive throughout her pregnancy, catering to her every need, his earlier awkwardness replaced by confident tenderness. Chloe and Mia were ecstatic, chattering constantly about their coming baby brother or sister, showering Ava's growing belly with kisses. On a calm spring evening, Ava went into labor. Ethan, outwardly calm but his eyes bright with emotion, rushed her to the hospital. Hours later, the sound of a newborn's cry echoed in the delivery room. It was a healthy baby boy. Ethan held his son for the first time, his usual composure completely gone. Overwhelmed by a love so profound, it brought tears to his eyes. Ava watched them, her own tears flowing freely, her heart overflowing. Chloe and Mia were brought in soon after, peering at their tiny brother with awe and excitement, solemnly promising to protect him always. Later, back in the quiet comfort of the mansion nursery, Ethan stood by the crib, watching his infant son sleep. Ava came up behind him, resting her head on his shoulder. Chloe and Mia played quietly on the floor nearby with their dolls. The house felt full, alive, brimming with a warmth that had nothing to do with the central heating. "Who would have thought," Ava murmured, her voice soft with wonder, "that rainy night, that it would lead to this?" Ethan turned, wrapping an arm around her, pulling her close. He looked from his son to his daughters, then into Ava's eyes, his own reflecting the deep, hard-won happiness that now defined him. "My shocking decision," he said, a wry, self-aware smile touching his lips. "It resulted in everything I never knew I needed." He had been the cold millionaire. She had been the woman he knew, starving with her children. His decision that day, born of shock and a flicker of buried humanity, had indeed resulted in something astonishing. It had resulted in redemption. It had resulted in family. It had resulted in a love strong enough to bridge any chasm, a light bright enough to banish any shadow. It had resulted in home. The journey born from a moment of unexpected compassion proved that second chances weren't just possible, but could lead to a future richer and more meaningful than any fortune could buy. And so, from a shocking decision made on a cold, rainy night, grew a love story no one could have predicted. Ethan, Ava, Chloe, Mia, and their new baby boy. A testament to resilience, the power of forgiveness, and the profound beauty of second chances. Their journey from despair and betrayal to this complete loving family truly shows that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we need to be. What an incredible journey for them all. We hope their story touched your heart as much as it touched ours. What was the most powerful moment for you? Do you believe true redemption, like Ethan's, is possible? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We love reading your perspectives. If you were moved by Ethan and Ava's story, please give this video a like. It really helps us bring more stories like this to you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next heartwarming or heart-wrenching tale. Thank you so much for watching and being part of our community. We'll see you in the next story.